So, all right, we are discussing Purim. And we're going to discuss Purim in chronological terms. First thing we're going to discuss about Purim is what month does Purim take place? Anybody want to throw that out there?
Adar.
Adar, excellent. It always takes place in Adar. Adar is either the 12th or the 13th month. And it's an interesting question, right? When you have a leap year, as we did last year, which Adar are you supposed to use? First Adar, second Adar. So this is not just sort of a random academic question. I think this actually will shed some light on Purim. You always put Purim in the month closest to Pesach, because Purim is meant to demonstrate a little bit of that redemption that is part of Pesach. And so we see Purim as sort of if you will, a proto Pesach of sorts. And so we want to have that Purim um, moment at um, at Pesach, proximate to Pesach. We also Purim. This just happens to be a custom that goes along with Purim. There's a custom called the machatzit shekel, the um, the half shekel. Now, originally, the half shekel was a census that would take place for the men between the ages of 20 and 50 who were militarily eligible. It was part of the census, and you would give your half shekel, and the half shekel would be counted. It's a beautiful mitzvah. Um, Obviously, we're not doing that census, but the idea, part of what it says about that in the Torah is that ish kofer nafsho, a person does a redemption for his soul. So the delivery of the machatzit shekel is done that way. The way it typically takes place nowadays is from the beginning of Adar. Usually, we try and finish it up by Purim. Is that there's a basket in the shul, and the basket in the shul is going to have the coins of the machatzit shekel, and you're going to take your money. In our case, it'll be Canadian dollars. Let's say you're going to take $5 Canadian. You're going to put it in as a donation, and you're going to buy the bundle of machatzit shekel. Now that you've bought that, you could walk off with it, but that would be very inconsiderate to all the other people in the synagogue. And then you donate that back to the basket. And now the basket, you've donated your machatzit shekel, and the charity fund um, has has picked up some extra funds. Traditionally, those funds go to what's called bedek habayit, or the general maintenance and operation of a synagogue. That is that is what typically it's used for. So that's sort of on the run up to Purim. Still, two more things that I want to talk about in the run up to Purim. Before Purim, we typically have two different Torah readings. There are four total readings that are going to be four special Torah readings in advance of Pesach, but only two of them come in advance of Purim. One is the reading of Parshat Shkalim, which actually details that idea of this half shekel donation. And that often dovetails either with Parshat Mishpatim, Parshat Truma sometimes. You look at the calendar to discover when that is. The other one is Parshat Zachor. Parshat Zachor is the reading from Parshat Kitetse Lemechama. It's the very last aliyah of Parshat Kitetse, and it describes the mitzvah to remember to obliterate the memory of Amalek. So we read that in shul as a um, as a um, as a reminder of this mitzvah. Sort of, there is a sense that that might even be a biblical obligation. But those are two special readings that we have always in advance of Purim. Zachor is always read on the Shabbat before Purim. Okay, now we still have one stop to make on our pre-Purim train, and that stop is the fast of Esther. Now, the fast of Esther is, ironically, not really the fast of Esther. Why is it really not the fast of Esther? Because the fast of Esther took place on Pesach. The fast, when you read about it in the Megillah, when Mordechai goes to Esther and says, "You can't remain silent. You've got to go approach the king." She says, "Okay, gather all of the Jews and fast." Well, when she says gather all the Jews and fast, that fasting happens on Pesach. That's the fast of Esther, we assume. this is called the fast of Esther because she's the hero of the story, and it's maybe the fast of Megillah, but it refers to a different fast. A lot of the halachic literature says it refers to the fast of soldiers in a war against Amalek, which is a spiritual war. And so, since it's a spiritual war, you're going to fast. You should just know that modern Israeli soldiers are not told to fast. Sometimes they're told specifically not to fast, even on Yom Kippur. I think this past year, Yom Kippur, we were like on high alert in Lebanon, and soldiers who were there were told to eat normally because you need to be ready to go, and we cannot worry that you are dehydrated or something like that. And so that's not an aspect of modern warfare, but this idea that maybe the pain of the war, the spiritual angst of the war, is captured by fasting. And so we fast, and interestingly, we fast up until we read the Megillah. I'm going to discuss a little bit what is done in terms of people who are so hungry that they're distracted by the Megillah. I'll get there, I promise, but let's just talk about the scope of the fast. This is one of those fasts which is a fast, which is a minor fast day, which means that if you have in mind that you're going to eat a very late dinner, how late a dinner? Well, you go look at the calendar. I'm going to take a quick peek at the Shara Tzedek calendar to tell you um, when it would be that the fast of Esther begins. Give me 1 second to. I'll get you that too. You'll know beginning and end times by the time we are finished with our conversation.
Well, I think the festival
begins 5:56. It ends 7:49.
Okay, 5:56 and 7:49. All right.
March 13th.
March 13th. That is correct. 5:56 on the Shara Tzedek website. Fast begins, and the fast ends at 7:49. Okay, so you're talking about roughly, we'll say 12 and a half hours, maybe 13 and a half hours. Okay, so it's not a terribly long fast. Eat an early breakfast. So you say, okay, I'm going to go, when I go to sleep at 10 p.m., I'm going to say, you know what, I'm getting up at 5 a.m., I'm going to eat my breakfast. And then you've had an early breakfast. So you skip lunch and have a late dinner. That's the day. So it's not a terribly difficult fast. But I would say this. So fast ends 7:49. Now our Megillah our Marav service is at 7:40, which means we would start maybe the Megillah reading at 7:55, right? So let's just say you are totally, thoroughly distracted. You cannot figure out which way is up. So you can eat things whose bracha is shehakol, right? Whose blessing is, we generally tell people not to eat things that are like crackers or cookies or cake, certainly not bread, but you could have, let's just say, make yourself a shake, right? Get some calories in, get some hydration in, get a little sugar to the brain. So now you can concentrate on the Megillah. That would be okay, because we do want you to be to appreciate that. But understand also what the sort of the general concept is that we're trying to arrive at on this in this two-part thing, is that you want there to be sort of the pain of fasting and the elation of Purim on either side of each other. You're trying to create this electric, this very emotional transition. And so the fast has its purpose. And, I've discovered as when you are 15, fasting you're growing and your body's metabolizing things really fast. When you get old and slow and you put on the pounds easily, that 13 hours is usually not so bad. The other thing I would suggest to you is go low carb for 3 or 4 days before, and you'll feel less hungry. Okay, that said, moving to, okay, so we've gotten the fast of Esther down, finished under our belts. Okay, now let's get to Purim itself. There are 4 mitzvot of Purim, and we are going to go through all of those mitzvot in due course. probably not going to finish all of them tonight, but we will by the time we do we're on again in 2 weeks, we will finish all of them by then. The first of the mitzvot is the reading of the Megillah. The reading of the Megillah is unique to a certain extent because it is the only time we read a text and then read it again the next day. There are a number of different reasons for that, but perhaps the one which is most prevalent is the idea that we don't want to be silent, that this miracle of Purim was such a profound miracle that we sort of have to articulate it both at night and again during the day. It is based on a verse that says, Laila v'lo yidom, at night, and I will not be silent. So the idea of it's both at night and I won't be silent, as part of the argumentation thereof. The reason I say it's pretty unique is because there's not really a Torah reading we do at night and the morning. You're going to say, Simchas Torah we do. Yeah, Simchas Torah, that's really just a custom. It's not an obligation. Similarly, some communities have the custom to read Megillat Eicha at night and then again in the morning. But again, that's only a custom. Typically, Eicha is read at night, and not an Ashkenazic tradition. In Sha'ar Tzedek tradition, we don't read it again in the morning. But the Megillah is both. And you're meant to hear the Megillah both at night and in the morning. The Megillah is a very unique text also, because the Megillah does not contain God's name, not once. God's name is sort of hinted at in the Megillah. God, as operating behind the scenes, is very much hinted at in the Megillah, but it is not mentioned, which creates a real difference between a Megillah text and a Sefer Torah text. A Sefer Torah requires a scribe to go to the mikvah beforehand, and he's going to write Hashem's name. Every time he writes Hashem's name, he would have had to go to the mikvah beforehand. He doesn't have to go in between each one. If he's writing 30 verses that day, he can go to the mikvah at the beginning, write all 30 verses, and then finish. But the next time he gets started writing, he needs to go to the mikvah again, and there's a special kedusha that is imparted with each one of the writing of Hashem's name. But the Megillah doesn't have that. And the Megillah, therefore, is of a lower kind of kedusha. But the Megillah is still written pretty much in exactly the same letter forms as the Torah. And the Megillah itself is, the halacha is that you have to actually read from the Megillah. So you cannot have memorized it and read it without actually looking at the words. There's a very interesting kind of a position, which is, I once had this experience with Rabbi Pacht. We found there was a Megillah for sale on eBay. I have a feeling if you look right now on eBay, you'll find some Megillot. So you look, they'll post PDFs or images of each one of the columns, or maybe every 3 or 4 columns you can see. And one of the laws of the Megillah is a Megillah only needs to be 51% kosher. That, let's say, every other word in the Megillah is a little bit, there's a letter here, a letter there. It's just not all. So that's still kosher. You're not allowed to be it's not allowed to be like, oh, I've got the first 51% is written perfectly, and then the rest of it's, not. If you have whole sections missing, that's a problem, because you don't want to miss a whole part of the story. But it's sort of special halacha with the Megillah that it can be 51% kosher. I would not recommend you go out and buy a 51% kosher Megillah, but it's sort of an interesting thing. There's another interesting thing about the Megillah, which is more in theory than in practice. And that is that the Megillah can be read in any language. Now, this is sort of a funny thing, because we know what the Megillah is, how you spell things in the Megillah if it's written in Hebrew. And we are told that you could write a Megillah in Greek. Now, And in principle, if we knew the proper translation of the Megillah, we could write it in English, and it could be read in English for people who speak English. Now, I'm not sure how it's supposed to be written. I think an English Megillah would be written like this. In the days of Achashverosh, Ayin, Yud, Nun, the there's no th in Hebrew, so maybe we would have to use like Dalid, the days, Dalid Yud Zayin of Achashverosh, right? Aleph Vet, right, and then you write Achashverosh, right? So that's how the English Megillah would be written. It'd be written like Yiddish is Germanic words in Hebrew letters. Judeo-Arabic is Arabic words in Hebrew letters. Ladino is Spanish Hebrew in Hebrew letters. It would be written like all those other languages. Again, that's very theoretical. That now the advantage of Hebrew is that even if you don't understand the Hebrew and you hear the Megillah, it is still kosher, right? So, right, there are a lot of words in the Megillah which are just hard words, right? I can't even pronounce it right now. But the words of the Megillah can get a little bit complicated, and it's a little, sometimes a little bit um, difficult to make out exactly whatever everything means. But as long as you hear it in Hebrew, you're fine. Now,
Rabbi,
yes.
sorry, is there any significance that it's a scroll?
Yes. So it is, we don't, if you notice, you'll never see anyone read the Megillah with like rolled up on a Sefer Torah, right? Where you have two scrolls, two Atzei Chaim, and you roll it. It's referred to in the Megillah itself. It's referred to as Ha'igeret Hazot, this letter. And you will see when people read the Megillah, they'll stretch it out and they'll fold it like one section under another, like they're sort of reading this, I always think of, Bugs Bunny, hear ye. I don't know, maybe I'm bad reference, but they the king's messenger comes out and unfurls a thing, and so it's meant to be like this. Just kind of came in from the king's, yeah. So that's the Megillah. Now, this is maybe the most important and practical thing, and this comes in direct conflict with a very significant tradition of the Megillah. You are meant to hear every word of the Megillah read from a kosherly written Megillah, which is fine. You go to shul, you can hear the reader read every word. Check, mitzvah done. I've heard every word from the reader, right? That's in principle, that's the synagogue's responsibility. Now, what comes in conflict with that? The exuberance with which people liked to drown out the name of the villain of the story, otherwise known as Haman Harasha, right? So experienced readers know that one of the places where Haman comes up a lot is at the end I'm going to say, in the sixth chapter. The sixth chapter is when when the king can't sleep, Achashverosh can't sleep, and they open up the chronicles of the king, and it's opened to the story of Mordechai, right? And the story of Mordechai is that Mordechai saved the king, and the king asked what was done for Mordechai, and the Na'arei HaMelech, the lads of the king, they say nothing's done for him. And then at that very moment, who comes? It says, Vayomer HaMelech mi bechatzer, who's in the courtyard? The Haman ba, right? So very often this is a Haman which gets killed, right? It's hard to hear. The Haman ba, and then everybody's so experienced readers are going to read that word Haman again so that you hear it. That's something to just be careful about. What happens if you don't? So then maybe you want to try ideally, if you have your own Megillah, which is not an easy thing to come by, especially these days, then you want to read it from the Megillah. Otherwise, you want to make sure you hear it. You might say it from from your Chumash, which is the minimal position, but really it's the rabbi's job to make sure that everyone could possibly hear every Haman, which means also, here's another important Megillah law. You have to hear the entire Megillah in order, which means that let's say there are two minyanim, and you come in the 6th chapter, and you say, no problem. I'm going to hear 6 through 10 now in the early minyan, and then I'll hear 1 through 5 at the second minyan. I'll get the whole thing, just not in order. Nope, that is considered not kosher. It also means you can't run out for a minute and get get a drink of water, go to the washroom. And the Megillah reading is typically 45 minutes long, right? It's not impossible, but it's not, if you've got a TikTok attention span, then it could be a bit of a challenge. So you want to prepare for that. There are a couple other traditions when it comes to reading the Megillah. The 10 sons of Haman are traditionally, we try and read them in one breath. And that's quite a feat. It's not a halacha, it's a tradition. If you don't read them in one breath, it is still kosher. And sometimes what you'll find is that when you get to the 10 sons of Haman, the Balkore, the reader, will take a break, and he'll give you the opportunity to go through all of them on your own. So that's becomes an opportunity. Okay. Other halachot with respect to Megillah reading, or just a couple of traditions. There are several brachot which are said at the beginning of the Megillah. The Megillah has 3 brachot. One is simple, Al Mikra Megillah, right on the reading of Megillah. That's a regular Birchot HaMitzvah, sort of what we would expect. The second one is one which you hopefully recognize from Hanukkah, because Megillah is considered Pirsume Nisa, publicizing a miracle, and we say Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam She'asa Nisim Lavotenu Bayamim Ahem Bazman Hazeh. Blessed are you, Hashem, King of the universe, who has wrought miracles for our forefathers in those days and at this season. So that's the same blessing that we say when we see the Hanukkah candles, right? After we've lit them, we see them, we make that blessing. And of course, the third blessing is the Shechianu blessing. These blessings in the morning time, these blessings will cover all of the other mitzvot of the day. So you should have in mind when you hear them in the morning that they're covering the mitzvot of the day. The other mitzvot, by the way, you cannot fulfill them at night, but we will address all of that later. There is just, I guess, something carryover. We are almost at at the 5-year anniversary of COVID. Maybe some of you remember it fondly, maybe some of you not fondly. So during COVID, if you recall, we had Megillah reading over Zoom. So Megillah reading, there's a whole debate amongst the rabbis about using amplification for observing some of these different things. Why? What happens when you amplify something? Well, when you speak into a microphone, it moves a membrane. The membrane moves a magnet. The magnet creates an electrical impulse. Then that electrical impulse travels through a wire and it goes to a speaker. The speaker then will move the wire will move a magnet, which moves a membrane, which creates a sound, right? If it's digital, then the magnet creates a digital signature, which is then transmitted over whatever electromagnetic projection system, could be a wire, could be wireless, all sorts of different things, goes to a speaker and produces a sound, right? That's what that is. The question that is debated is how do we understand that sound? Do we understand that sound as actually an accurate representation of the spiritual action, or do we not? In biblical obligations, we don't allow you to fulfill your obligation that way. We say that electronic means don't work. But because the Megillah is a rabbinic obligation, and because there was really no other way to accomplish this, because of health authority restrictions, because of truly dangerous situations. So we said, okay, read the Megillah over Zoom. But that is a sort of a last line of defense. A long time ago, I think even the third year, maybe by 2023 already, we had said we're not doing any Megillah readings over Zoom. Some people found, this synagogue, that synagogue of this place, that place was broadcasting. And they did what they did. But we highly, highly, highly recommend that people find an in-person Megillah reading. There are a couple of other similar kinds of scenarios that one might ask about, and in principle, that means we don't use a microphone for the Megillah, and for people who are using hearing aids, that becomes a particularly complicated question. But if you are able to hear it without using your hearing amplification device, one way to do it is like if you have a better ear and a worse ear, and let's say you can hear with your better ear, but it becomes sort of clarified by putting your hearing device in the worse ear, so then you may be able to have your cake and eat it too, because then you're still hearing it partially with natural means, but you're getting some clarification from the amplified one. This is a difficult thing because I know that in Shaare Tzedek sometimes people have a lot of trouble hearing without any hearing augmentation. And if you would like, you can come and speak to me about that on an individual basis, so we can try and help and figure out best practices on that matter. Okay. I think that sort of covers everything. By the way, if you happen to go to a Megillah reading and nobody is drowning on Haman, that is a custom. There are some rabbis who are vehemently against that. You can see that in the halachic literature, they'll say people get all mixed up. They think that the mitzvah is drowning on Haman's name and not hearing the Megillah. But there's no question in the halachic literature which is more important. Hearing the Megillah is much more important than drowning on Haman's name. That is the clear and unadulterated favorite. Hearing the Megillah. Now, who needs to hear the Megillah? Now, generally speaking, we have a principle that mitzvot aseh shazman grama, that time-generated mitzvot, only men are obligated in time-generated mitzvot. And the Megillah is a time-generated mitzvah. It is only going to be heard on the 14th of Nisan. Only going to be heard that particular day. At night, day, so it should be one where women are exempt. However, because there is a concept of avhein hayu ba'ot hanes, that women were involved in this miracle, and the argument could be made is that not only were women involved in this miracle, but without women there would not have been a miracle, right? This is quintessentially, I mean, Pesach has the same function, just as an interesting matter of fact, that it is very much the women who are at the vanguard of saving the Jewish people. But certainly in Megillat Esther, Esther, of course, is the champion of the whole book. So, women are obligated in the Megillah. The Mishnah in Megillah says, "Hakol chayavim b'mikra Megillah afilu katan ve'isha." Right, even a a woman, and even a child. Now, this creates a very interesting scenario and a very copious debate, of which I'm not going to fill out, but there's a whole debate about on what level what is exactly a woman's obligation. Megillah, is a woman's obligation only hearing Megillah? Is it not reading the Megillah? But there is a lot of support for the fact that women certainly can read the Megillah. At Shaare Tzedek, we have a women's Megillah reading. You're allowed to have as many readers as you want. Megillah does not have to be read beginning to end by one reader. The readers are meant to stand, but you can have people for as few as probably 3 psukim, 3 verses. And so you can have 20 different readers who each take a different part of it and participate in the reading of the Megillah. So we do our women's Megillah reading during the day at, more or less it takes place at usually at 9 a.m. And there are often many different women who read the Megillah. And so I certainly encourage those of you who would like to take a turn reading the Megillah to be part of that operation, because women's obligation in Megillah reading is identical to men's. Now, let's get to children at the Megillah reading. Children in Megillah reading, it is good to bring your children to Megillah reading, but it is not good to bring a child to the Megillah reading who could become the secret sabotage agent for the Megillah. If a child is, and you need to know your child. You need to know if that person is that child is of the age. Can you bring them to the Megillah reading? For that very reason, because both parents are going to be obligated in the Megillah, we have an early reading and a late reading to make sure that everybody is able to satisfy their requirements to read the Megillah. And so that's also, every family should strategize as necessary. It is good, especially once children kind of understand the mitzvah Megillah, to start educating them in that. I think that's going to start at maybe 7, 8 years old. Again, that's a know your child kind of a question. And hopefully people move forward on that accordingly. So I think I've covered pretty much all of the basics of the mitzvah of reading the Megillah. I don't know, does anybody have any questions, comments, thoughts before I wrap up? No. Okay. So once again, though, that mitzvah is one where you need to hear fully during the night and then again fully during the day. Now, that can be any time during the day, but generally speaking, we try and dispatch of those things early. I should also add one other thing. In the morning minyan, you also, if you're attending a regular minyan, there's also a Torah reading. The Torah reading is actually a unique Torah reading, because the Torah reading is the only Torah reading of the entire year that is only 9 psukim. Usually the Torah reading is supposed to be 10 psukim. This one is 9 because it's an entire subject. And it actually happens to be what we read at the end of last week's Parsha, the chapter of Vayavo Amalek, the original story of Amalek attacking the Jewish people. Mordechai, your hand is raised.
Thank you. My namesake, various pronunciations and of Mordechai or Mordechai. Do you have any?
As far as I understand, it is Mordechai.
All through?
What?
All through the Megillah?
I will have to double check on the exact pronunciation there. As far as I know, there may be a couple of variants, but they're not coming to mind, so I can't.
I've heard it done.
Again,
different ways.
I will report on that next week. How's that? Or 2 weeks.
Thank you.
Depending on, just so people understand, there are some various kinds of changes that can come to the pronunciation of a word in a biblical Hebrew text, depending on where a word might fall in the sentence, and what might come after that word. And so I will I will have to be a little bit more. I haven't finished myself preparing the Megillah. I only read the first 5 chapters myself last year, so I will double check again on what Mordechai is asking.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, Laila Tov. Thank you.
Thank you. And next week we'll do the other mitzvot of Purim.
2 weeks.
Rabbi.
Yeah, Laila Tov.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Very much.
Thank you, Rabbi.